I don't know of another story anywhere in the province as good as this one, where a difficult community issue which had all the potential for fracturing the community, where it had such a positive outcome, not only during the short term for the processes we've talked about, but also in the long term for the benefit of the community. It's just a remarkable story.
It all started with Haig Brown. Van Egan was his neighbor, and it was over damming the Campbell River for hydro. And then it was a battle over maintaining water quality with the mine. They were concerned way back when, before it was a popular thing. And that was CREC, formed out of those people who worked together and saw the value of mobilizing communities and getting everybody together, but dealing with facts, not emotion, but fact. Look at it and say, well, here, this is what it is, and that is the Beaver Lodge.
When we first moved there, you could view the city as a long linear strip all the way from Ocean Grove up to basically First Avenue. All of the streets just extended a block into the woods, and so everybody wanted to be near the water, and as a result that's what they got. But it didn't make for an efficient community in many respects, particularly as that trend continued. The road network was really being limited because everybody was forced to use the highway. As the community grew, there became demand for more services, things like transit and so forth. And in order to make those more efficient, to ensure that security services, hospital services, and all those kinds of things worked efficiently, you wanted a road network that was a little more integrated than it had been. That was really our focus. How can we make this community more practical to build in? How can we make it affordable at the same time? And as a result, there was all of this crown land and then forest land. And unlike most communities, a lot of that property in other places would have been subdivided into 5, 10 acre, 20 acre parcels as part of the rural sector. And in our case, we were fortunate. Forest companies were keen to actually develop land, and so was the province at the time. So that's how that thrust emerged.
We were working very closely with the province to develop a plan for tying in property in the area that is now called the Beaver Lodge Lands, which was Crown land at the time. So the province was very interested in seeing us do that, and we did end up with a beautiful plan which showed complete neighborhoods, schools, all the amenities that are required in a new, larger neighborhood. It looked really great on paper. It seemed like the right way to go for the city, for costs, for future development. It just really fit. And we felt quite proud of having worked with the province on this plan. We were lucky because we had the college and the school both needing something at the same time. And so the timing was probably had a lot to do with it. We had developed the concept, we had really looked at how well it could work, what the difficulties might be in perhaps mixing two different kinds of schooling at two different levels. How would we then provide extra education for high school people, say in the vocational field, which the college handled, and to the most part. And so how that would work, and all of those pieces with a lot of work came together very, very well.
The college would like to build with a high school and have a kind of have some joint facilities with them, and so they agreed that they could be on the edge of it. That is where they would like to be, and but it's a case now. If this area doesn't have 2,855 housing units in it, then the population pressure will be somewhere else. So they'll have to decide where they want to put a new high school, and preferably close by, and the North Island College would build with them, but they would not devastate this area anymore. They'd have it as a good study area, and it would give it considerable protection.
Many people were concerned that this was an inappropriate area to have a housing development at the scale, in particular, that was proposed by council. And I ended up, again, before the trust the lands were discovered, the documents were discovered, I ended up being publicly sympathetic with and supportive of the view that this proposed development was too much. But it was just an opinion, and I didn't have any authority or anything more than perhaps some influence in terms of public opinion.
They were going to start in the public involvement process, and I go, oh, okay, so this is pretty reasonable. We thought, okay, it's not a big issue, right? There's going to be a public process. So then we asked about the streams. What would the setbacks be on the streams? And you know, in forestry, the setbacks are 30 meters on a salmon stream, both of which the forks of Sims Creek are salmon bearing. And I said, well, how much are you going to set back? Well, 7.5 meters is all. And we said, well, 7.5 meters is kind of not enough, right? And we said, well, what about dogwood? He said, well, dogwood's going through, and the college is getting built, and blah, 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 blah. And we said, well, if you've already made all these decisions, why are you bothering with public involvement? And then that started the kerfuffle, and there was a fellow from the club who used to sit on the Campbell River Environment Council, it was called. Council was like a federation. It was made up of member organizations. All the environmental groups in Campbell River and Quadra would meet once a month and talk about the issues. And I explained what the issue was, and that got Creek involved. And then from there it expanded, and the Friends of Beaver Lodge formed. That was Norma Sonderholm and Linda Nagel and a bunch of others. And together they had their own group because they were concerned for different reasons. Creek, we had in the beginning, there was Keith and myself from the Fish and Wildlife Association, and Dick Murphy, well, Doc Murphy, Don McIver, Stan Goodrich, and Van Egan. Yeah, and Van was very active in the association. Van was a retired teacher from town. Stan was a retired teacher as well, and so we got going, and we formed our sort of working group, and we took the information that was being shown to the public through the public process and poked holes in it. They had the Sims Creek stopping at the airport main. Well, it crosses over and in a couple of cases goes for 6 or 8 kilometers further on the other side of the new Inland Island Highway. And some of the best coho spawning was up there. And at one time there was a lot of coho that used that system. Populations had fallen off, and that's why we got involved from a Fish and Wildlife Association perspective, is because of the fishery and the wildlife concerns.
The company actually wrote to the government in the 1920s saying that they were concerned they were going to run out of trees on Vancouver Island, and they wanted to donate 1,000 acres of land to the government for an experimental forest. Maybe if they planted other trees, they would grow faster, and maybe they could make more money. So they wanted, it wasn't just any 1,000 acres. They wanted to donate 1,000 acres that had a stream going through it, that they wanted beavers on it because beavers are a situation. This was set up to be a real experimental forest. And the government wasn't interested. About 10 years later, they got an interest, and so they came up and worked with a company, and they looked at lots of sites, and they picked that site. And then they, monies were put up to plant trees.
The Vancouver Island Plantation Forest was created through an ordering council by cabinet, and its purpose and function was to grow trees in perpetuity. And you have to understand that back in those days, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about reforesting areas and planting trees. So they used it as an experimental forest. It was divided up into 20-acre blocks. They each had a concrete monument with a brass pin on the corner posts. Then they tried just scattering tree seed. They tried planting trees, and they planted ponderosa pine from the interior, Douglas fir from all over the coast and the interior, a Sitka spruce, amongst others, and they tried various methods and everything else.
So it's quite a unique area.
Very unique.
Yeah, the first planting took place here in 1931, and that was the year that the government was given the land, and the transaction was made, and immediately after they started tree planting here, and they did that for the next few years.
So not only is it a unique little ecosystem here, but it's quite historically unique too.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like Elk Falls with the park with the timber that didn't get burned in the big fire. Well, this is our forest history, and for a community that's so dependent on forestry, it's an area that should be set aside for its forest purposes. To try and chop it all down, that's like burning books.
We had taken all of the mayor and council on a tour to show them what it was and how important we felt it was to the community to have 1,000 acres right in the heart of the city. I mean, there's towns that would kill for the ability to have that access to lands like that. And I remember finishing up with the mayor, and oh no, she informed me that absolutely they had the definitive proof that this wasn't a gift and everything else. Well, I went back and saw my friend, and I said, well, it's the last time I trust you, right? Because just got the word. And he says, no, I know it's a gift. So he called his friend who worked in the property division at the ministry in Victoria. And the guy says, what's going on up there? He said, this is the third request I've had for that information this week. And he faxed him up a copy of the document, the letter, which is where the province acknowledged and accepted the gift from Elk River Timber at the time. And in that letter it said it warranted and covenanted that it would be only used for the purpose of experimental work in reforestation and for forest management purposes, period. With that covenant, when you accept a gift, you end up with a trust obligation. Anyway, he faxed up this letter, and we took the letter, and then I took it to Craig, to our group, and I said, here's the letter. This has got everything we need, and it's okay, what do we do now? So we went to see our lawyer. We had the document, the file numbers, everything, so we knew exactly what to ask for.
We drove to Victoria, and we got the file. Don had written for the file before, but it got mixed up with some other numbers, and then they got it straightened out, and we went down, Ministry of Forests, they gave us the file, and it was very thick. We read the whole thing. Don would take a sheet and read his, and I would take one, and we just started at the top and went down to the bottom. Now, at the very bottom, the last document was the deed. It showed how the timber company had sold the land to the government or donated it for the price of $2. to be used in perpetuity. We brought all of that back. I was duplicating all of this stuff because I thought it was every bit as interesting as the actual. We brought it back and took it to one of the newspapers, but the only thing they were interested in was the deed.
Since they had found the documentation to prove that this was a genuine trust situation, I knew it was just going to be absolutely gigantic. It was going to be a story that was going to have enormous legs for me. It was going to keep me in print for years ahead.
So I looked at it and made sure we had a legitimate copy that was the one that did in fact originate from the 20s and the early 30s. And it was, clearly. And it was a document that very, very clearly told me, even though I wasn't not a lawyer, and didn't have formal legal training, it was pretty clear that, as Don was saying, that this document meant that the trust lands were inviolate and had to be protected. Referred it to the legal staff in the Attorney General's Ministry, and they did a thorough review and came back with the legal opinion that said this is a trust, it must be honored, and you, Mr. Attorney, you are the responsible trust authority, and it's up to you to ensure that it's upheld.
I can remember the day that Colin Gableman walked into my office at City Hall to let me know that there was going to be a complete change of plans. It was a real shock to me. I had talked to a couple of people from the Environmental Council earlier. Don McIver, who is just a long-term, really caring citizen, had said that he thought he remembered something that land was supposed to be used for other than turning it into residential. So I had asked Lauren Anderson, our administrator, to check and see what the situation was. We checked with the Forestry's department. They said, no, there's nothing that we can see. We checked with Lands Branch. There was nothing on title. So we felt, well, you can't discount memories of people who've been here for years before that, but it appeared to be clear sailing. So we were quite thinking we were going to go ahead until the day that Colin walked in and said, it's not on title, but there is a document, and it is to be used for other purposes, experimental forestry. So the residential development will not be able to proceed, and it was a real shock to find that out.
It was a real surprise. We simply couldn't understand how the province wouldn't have known about it. It had no status. It wasn't recorded in any documentation anywhere. And so I thought it was a bit of genius on whoever managed to dig it up to have even thought that there could have been something like that there. And it invariably brought to context the fact that, whoa, we've got a whole community where the infrastructure has all been predicated for the last decade and longer on moving in a certain direction. And if that's thrown out now, it's going to create long-term problems for the community.
Colin Gableman was our MLA. He was also the Attorney General, and he had to step back from this whole process as Attorney General because there were legalities involved, and so we did not have our own MLA to champion our cause because he was in a position in government that wouldn't allow that to happen. So, but he did the very best he could for us.
Council at the time wasn't very happy I must say. There were a number of skirmishes, but the reality was I was the trustee, and as the law has it, I was the sole decision maker. It wasn't a cabinet decision, it was my decision. And I wasn't allowed to have anybody else influence my decision.
It took off like a rocket, because I absolutely knew it would, because there were some very, very active, very conscientious people who were with the environmental movement here in town at that time. I'm thinking of Norma Soderholm. Norma was just a delight for the media, because she was very feisty, she was very capable of giving you really good quotes and all kinds of stuff for the record, and she wasn't going to back off 1 inch. She was absolutely determined, as was Don and a number of other people, that if this land, which did have some beaver ponds and that kind of thing in it, if it had been donated to the province as forest land, then it was not going to be developed by the municipality.
We spent most of our time ensuring that the school college could continue to be built. The Dogwood Street could go through as planned to hook up eventually with the new highway, which was pretty far in the works at that time. We were never too sure we were even going to get that, but it was our dream that we would.
Mary Ashley's absolute determination to press ahead with the development of those subdivisions did not go over well. And there were constant meetings. Some of them very strong stuff. And Norma Soderholm was like a terrier with a weasel or something like that. She wasn't going to let go at all. She wasn't budging an inch either.
Norma was an amazing lady. She was the one who used to walk her dog in here. And it was Norma, when she first heard that the city was going to turn this into, was going to obliterate the forest basically, she said, no way, I am not going to allow that. And she was the person who formed the Friends of the Beaver Lodge and called the community to action. She was a very dynamic lady. I'm so sorry she has passed, but I'm delighted that a trail is now named after her, and she would delight in being able to talk to you today if she was still around. So she definitely was our leader, and she was the president of Friends of Beaver Lodge for many years.
One thing I'd like to say, there'll be a few spots out here that might be a little bit muddy.
No kidding.
And I've got about a dozen of these sticks, and you're welcome to take one and just throw them in the back of my truck when we're finished. So if you want to take one just to steady yourself, help yourself. I had about a dozen poles like that one, only they were wooden ones. And I had them in the back of the truck, and I have certain days that I was going to conduct the trip, because I was a shift worker too, so I had to work it in. But I would be there on the day I said at the time, and I would take the people through. And the one year we had about 4 inches of new snow, and I can remember Dr. Murphy, thinking that was a pretty rough place to go to walk. But we took all kinds of people through, yeah, and that really helped, yeah. But the lady that did that, the Friends of Beaver Lodge, that was the ones that we were able to provide the petitions, for thousands of signatures, and that was a thing that helped seal it when we made aware of how many people were keen on it, Yes, oh yeah.
I know we had lots of discussions in Committee of the Whole at the council. In fact, it used to be a bit awkward, because I would on the evening be heading out to a meeting, and meanwhile the street was getting full of cars coming into Norma's house of all of her friends, and so they'd look at me and I'd look at them and think, oh, there's the enemy, sort of thing, you know, and it was. So I remember that as being quite funny, actually, in many ways, but there were a lot of hours spent trying to think about how we could resolve this and really deal with it in a way that would be ideally a win for everybody. That ultimately would be the objective. But in this particular case, you had a group of people whose power was simply people power, and they had the municipality whose power was through regulation and so forth, but neither had any real control over the land. The land belonged to the province, and so ultimately it was going to be a provincial decision.
It was a difficult time because it definitely set quite a number of people in this town against the municipality. And quite frankly, I think the municipality did a really good job at that time. I
remember we had some different meetings that I had not experienced before where, yes, people were not happy. There was some shouting and some probably language used that you normally didn't hear in those circumstances. But I think also behind that, everyone was trying to do what they thought was right. So you had to respect that. You couldn't ignore that fact. And while we were on different sides for a while, it was always my hope that we could find the compromise that long-term would be the solution. And when you're in local politics, or any politics, I guess, you learn to think long-term.
The pressure from the municipality and development and that will probably weigh fairly heavy in the decision in the end. And they might end up trying to come with some type of a compromise. But we feel that the area has already been compromised. 25% of it has been removed, probably illegally. And so we're not too keen on any more compromises out here.
Our MLA was Colin Gableman under the NDP. And Colin had been made the Attorney General. And suddenly he's got a huge problem on his hands because I think he realized that it had definitely been given in trust, so it had to be preserved to some degree. But the municipality and the school district wanted to do some development at least. So it was a matter of working out a compromise.
So the trust had to be honored and as best it could be. And so there were some alienations, which I really regretted, but it was very difficult to find any other way through it. And so we've ended up with a legacy for forever in this community, which I believe has been fully accepted by the community. It's something that successive councils have come to recognize is a positive, not a negative. And there was also a cabinet decision that the alienated lands would be replaced by twice as much additional land. And I credit John Cashore with driving that particular issue through, because I kept my distance a little bit on those kinds of issues. My focus was on the trust. That was the obligation, legal obligation that I had.
Since we had done a lot of the planning around the compromise, and were able to accomplish some land swaps that would be necessary to make it happen, to let Dogwood go through, and especially to let that high school college complex be built. I was very relieved and very pleased.
It was an amazing compromise. There could have been a response, especially by the Environmental Council and Don and Stan and the people that were working with them. There could have been a response saying, look, this is the trust, the original trust. It cannot be and should not be violated. No roads, no school, no college, no. There was other land taken out for the public school system as well. They could have said no to all of that and put the pressure on it. It still would have fallen to me to make the decision, but I didn't have to fight against that, an element that could have taken a really dogmatic position on it. So it was wonderful to see that people in the community were prepared to compromise and to put together something that could work for the benefit of the whole community without there being a dogfight over it. So that too is a tribute to the activists in the Environmental Council at the time and to Council, because they could have just hung tough and made our job a lot more difficult by saying, you know, no, we're doing the development. They wouldn't have been allowed to, but it would have been a messy fight. We didn't have the messy fight because everybody compromised, everybody worked together, and everybody was, for the most part, pretty satisfied with the conclusion. John Cashore and his staff in the Ministry of Environment and then working with the Minister of Forests and Minister of Lands did a great job in putting that all together. And the cabinet, I remember the cabinet meeting that discussed it. There was no dissent. Everybody was on board for it. And I'm not supposed to give away cabinet secrets, but didn't even need a vote. Everybody was in favor of what we were doing.
And fortunately, we had groups of people that were very interested in sitting in on a committee that would take this through its paces and take the time to do it well. And that was such relief to know that really good people who, you know, lots of them had long histories with the municipality and with the environment, environmental concerns and so forth, got busy and just, you know, came up with a really good concept for what Beaver Lodge Lands could be for the whole community. And it turned out to be more than I ever dreamed it could be.
We had to have the plan prepared through the ministry by July 1st, 1994. So we worked like crazy and came up with a good plan. It was built by the people.
I've been involved with that trust committee from the beginning. It continues to meet about 5 times a year. And although a lot of the people who were originally on it are now no longer there. Some of them, unfortunately, have passed away, such as Norma Soderholm. But we do continue to meet, and there are still lots of people around who are absolutely bound and determined that it will be preserved properly and used as intended.
Is not a park, it is an experimental forest. So people in the community often think it's a park because that's how it is most used. The Beaver Lodge lands are managed by the Crown, so in this case it means the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations. In Campbell River, that means basically one person is in charge, and that's the resource operations manager here now, Greg Goldstone. However, that person is guided by the Beaver Lodge Trust Committee. So the Trust Committee is a group of volunteers. They meet 5 times a year, and they in turn are guided by the resource use plan. In terms of what actually gets done on the ground, that is primarily dealt with by Greenways Land Trust. So we have a maintenance agreement with the ministry, and that means that the day-to-day kind of making sure bridges aren't falling apart and Trails are maintained. That's up to Greenways Land Trust. We would like very much, ideally, to increase the size of the Beaver Lodge. For example, the school district has owned a piece on McFedrin Road for some time. It was given to the Ministry of Education from the Ministry of Forests at that time for educational uses. And now the school district has deemed that they are not going to use that site. And so we would very much like that to follow the legislation, which was that if it wasn't going to be used for educational uses, it needs to be returned back to Ministry of Forests. So at this time on our planet, we are losing habitat everywhere. But in this situation, we actually have an opportunity to leave future generations more than what we have now. And that's my vision, and the vision of Greenways Land Trust is to actually increase the size of the Beaver Lodge Lands.
Once the whole thing came to light, and it was discovered that there was experimental forest was the use, you start to think, okay, we have to figure out a way to go back to square one and redo this, but still try to retain some of those elements. And then after that came, you know what, we're going to have this forest right on our doorstep. This is going to be an amazing thing. And I think until the committee that worked with forestry started to develop the project, the long-term thinking around that lands, it didn't really hit everybody how extremely valuable this had turned out to be. It took a while, but we got past it, and everybody that had to do with it still speaks to each other. And more so, I think, maybe closer because of it. And we did have a 20-year celebration that was organized, and a lot of people came to that, and the perspectives again were discussed, but mainly we were there to congratulate the committee that had spent all this time, 20 years, working with Beaver Lodge Lands to make it the best that it could be. They've done a lot, and it could have been just left by itself and nothing happened, but as it is now, it's a huge benefit to the community as a whole.
Governments don't always get everything right, but I think in this case, the bill and the subsequent management of the lands have been, the bill was good and the management's been equally good, and that's one of, for those people who say government can't ever do anything right, here's a good example of, among many, of what government can do for positive benefit.
I always thought that we could win it, even though it looked hopeless, And there was a few of us that were pretty stubborn. Yeah. So I'm really glad that it took place, and because when we had rumors that there was something strange about the land, and we got it straightened around. Yeah.
As much as it was a very tough time for me personally, it was very exhausting a lot of the times. I am so happy when I walk or run or spend my time in here and I can look around and say, yep, I had a hand in saving this. I really did. I was one of the people on the ground. And so, yeah, I was proud to be involved. I'm glad it's over, but I'm really proud to be involved.
I'm very happy to have been a part of a project that actually over time turned out to be make the community even better.
Hopefully others in future generations will stick up for it and do what's necessary to keep it there and keep it as part of our community.
I have to admit, I regard that as one of the main stories that I've had the great privilege of covering for Campbell River.
And a remarkable gift of those benefactors back in all started, I guess, in about 1925, and it was great foresight. And some of the trees that were planted in there are pretty unique for British Columbia, and my only regret is that there isn't more provincial attention to it in terms of what a community can do with its own jewels, its own values, its own assets.
The community manages the Beaver Lodge lands by volunteering. We have our Adopt a Trail program. We have Greenways board that is always welcoming people who want to become active. There's the Beaver Lodge Trust Committee that welcomes members. And if somebody doesn't want to volunteer in a structured way, just picking up litter is really useful. In terms of Beaver Lodge lands, talking is a really useful action. So educating people around you about the damage that happens when dogs go into creeks, about the damage and fragmentation to the forest when unauthorized trails are built, about the damage that happens whenever we go off the main map trails, then that is a really, really useful action, just to talk about the Beaver Lodge lands and ultimately to care about them.